South Africa's economy has shrunk by 1.5% in the third quarter of the year. It comes after the economy recorded growth for 4 consecutive quarters, the last quarter expanding by 1.2%. But there were several factors inhibiting growth, including the economic disruptions caused by the violence in July and loadshedding. I'm joined now by Isaah Mhlanga, Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes. Isaah, good afternoon to you. We had a long period of growth that seemed to be recovering, perhaps to an extent, from the pandemic. Now the economy is contracted again. Considering what was happening in that quarter, it's possibly no surprise.
Stephen, it's not a surprise, certainly to us. What is a surprise is the extent of the contraction relative to what we expected. We expected around minus 1.2% on a quarter-on-quarter annualized basis, and it came in at a minus 1.5%, as you all know. The big surprise to us there was agriculture, forestry and fishing, which contracted by 13.6% on a quarter-on-quarter basis. Usually, the third quarter in the agricultural sector is not a good production quarter, given that much of the harvest happens in the second quarter and other quarters of the year. So perhaps that would have contributed. But as you say, a number of factors contributed to the overall decline. 6 of the 10 sectors of the economy contracting. It doesn't bode well. But also, if you look from an expenditure side, we don't see encouraging signs, given that household consumption, which is now about 62% of the total economy, also contracted, which is one of the biggest contraction that we have seen since the recovery started to take hold in the third quarter of 2020. So also, this is the first quarterly contraction since the recovery started in the third quarter of last year, which means going forward, we are actually going to see much milder growth, particularly considering load shedding. Even in the Q4, we still had load shedding at the beginning of October and also in November. We had stage 4 at some point in time. Now we have Omicron variant, which will instill fear in the population, but also the international flight cancellation are going to inhibit in terms of tourism, growth locally. So that also doesn't bode well for overall growth. But for the year as a whole, 5% growth is not really much in dispute. It is the spillover effects into the first quarter of next year that is also going to weigh down on next year's growth.
I mean, it also shows you how difficult it is to make economic predictions in this time. I mean, around the world, you had economists making predictions for what would happen to the global economy. The Omicron variant suddenly arrives seemingly out of nowhere, and everything changes. It shows you how difficult the economic picture still is.
Absolutely. And it's still quite difficult to see what is the impact of Omicron is going to be. We don't know how severe the disease that it causes going to be. We also don't have a clear picture of the hospital admissions that are going to inform whether we are going to see hard lockdowns of some sort or not. And that is going to be quite important in trying to predict what's likely to be, from a policy point of view, the extension of the COVID grant next year when it comes to an end in March, but also in terms of the wage settlements that are going to be made by government with public sector employees. All those things will depend on how severe the Omicron is going to be, which at this point does not, we actually don't have much information to work with. So at this point, we just have to make assumptions or create scenarios on, if the severity is very high, we expect some lockdowns, which will come with negative implications for economic growth. But if we don't see that severity, it means what we have seen over the last couple of quarters is likely to unfold, and therefore no change in focus. But in all honesty, there isn't anyone that has changed focus yet, given that there is so much uncertainty surrounding the Omicron variant.
We saw the unemployment figures last week and proof that we have now record formal unemployment. In other words, from Statistics South Africa, these are the highest numbers of unemployed people that we've seen since records began in 2008. But we also know that essentially the number of people who would like a job and can't get one's over 12 million. And yet, Isaah, I don't know if you noticed, but I did, there was literally silence from government in response to that. Are you seeing any plans in the pipeline to do anything to get our job growing, to get our economy going and grow jobs?
Look, I think the macro outlook and the outcomes, we can characterize them as it's an economy that is in crisis. If the economy was a patient, it is out of ICU from the COVID disease, but it's still not yet discharged to go out there. It still requires significant attention. That's how I would describe it. But the policymakers, which will be the equivalent of doctors, they continue to prescribe the same medication, hoping that something will come along and help the economy out. But unfortunately, the continued prescription of the same medication does not heal this economy in terms of providing the jobs that are required. Hence, we continue to see the unemployment rate reaching new highs every time a new data is released. We want to see the business environment being improved because ultimately it is businesses that create jobs. And for businesses to create jobs, they need a conducive environment. It's things that we know. We have been talking about these things for quite some time. Make it easy for businesses to apply for licenses. Make it easy for them to get permits. Quicker and easier and more efficient. Remove corruption, which increases the cost of businesses being set up. All those things, in addition to provide, security of energy. Without electricity, for instance, you can almost bet no big manufacturing company will be willing to come and establish operations in the country without security of energy. We have been talking about this for the last decade, but for some reason we haven't solved it. So this policy inertia, particularly from government, needs to be solved.
Isaah Mhlanga, thanks very much indeed, Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes. Really do appreciate the time.